Hello and welcome back. In this episode, I'll be showing how to make this dwarven wall decoration. So, something that's more of a sculpted relief than a statue, but it is slightly three-dimensional, as you just saw. And, like always, I've uploaded a pay what you want PDF file over on DriveThruRPG to go along with it, so if you want to have a go at making some yourself, feel free to pay a small amount, or just grab it for free by putting a 0 in the little box. Anyway, now that's all out of the way, let's get started. Okay then, the first thing we'll need to do is cut out this texture here, leaving a slight border around the edge, and we'll be gluing that to some corrugated card. I'm just using single corrugated in this example. And like I say, we'll glue the paper piece onto that. And I like to stick it on at a 45-degree angle to the corrugation itself, as that gives us stronger edges. We'll then need to give that a few minutes to dry, so to speed things up, here's one that's already dry, which we can then cut to size with a sharp knife and a metal ruler. And it should go without saying, but you know, do be careful when using a sharp knife. Anyway, here I am cutting that last edge. There you go. Next, we can cut out the reverse side, that's this piece here. We'll cut that exactly to size, as we're going to be gluing that to the back of the first piece, like you can see me doing here on the screen. Though we do need to make sure that it's the right way up, so that when it's done, it ends up looking something like this. Okay, the next thing we'll need to do is glue all of these textures to some thick card. In this example, mine is around 1mm thick. Then, it's just a matter of cutting all these to size. Though I should point out that the only one you need to pay any special attention to is the hand textures, because before you cut those out, you will need to score them along the two lines. But other than that, it's all pretty straightforward. However, it does take a bit of time, so I've done all of mine off screen and put them in this little box to keep them all together. If I then bring the first piece back in, we can now start layering some of these pieces on top of each other, to get that slight 3D effect that I mentioned at the beginning. So, as you can see, I'm starting things off with the stone archway, just using a glue stick to glue it down, though you will see me switch to some PVA glue later on when sticking on some of the smaller pieces, as I find that's easier to apply with a little brush when dealing with some of those. But yeah, I'll leave the video running while I carry on and do just that. Anyway, here I am at the end of all that, just using an old brush to clean up anywhere where the glue has seeped out, so that when we're done, we end up with something that looks like this. That's the main part of the dwarf done. Now, all we'll need to do is add the axe and the shield. Right then, to make the axe, we'll cut out this L-shaped texture, and we'll also need a cocktail stick or a toothpick, whatever you want to call it. And we're simply going to wrap the texture around the stick in the orientation that I'm showing in the diagram in the corner of the screen. So yeah, here I am doing just that, which should result in this kind of thing. That's what we're aiming for. Then if we take a sharp knife again, we can carefully trim that to size, using the edge of the paper as a guide. There you go. Next, we'll take one of the axe head textures that we cut out previously, and to glue this into place, I like to use a bit of super glue. So if I carefully dab a small amount of that onto the edge that's going to be fixed to the side of the stick, rather than trying to squeeze the exact amount out of the tube, that can be then glued into place, just like you can see me doing here. And that should result in this kind of thing. So, a bearded axe for our bearded dwarf. Now, this next part is optional, but you'll notice that I've also included this small square texture here. And this is because if you have a small hole punch, like the one I used back in the treasure video, That can be used to punch out a small circle, which can then be glued to the top of the axe head. And I'm just using a bit of PVA glue for this, as you can see. But like I say, you don't have to do this part, plus the one I have is a bit too small anyway, but I've included the option just in case you have a punch that'll work for this kind of thing. Anyway, next we'll take one of the hand textures that we cut out earlier, and it's hard to see, but I've also bent it slightly along those scored lines that I mentioned. And it's then just a matter of applying some glue to the top edge of the axe. I'm using some PVA again, and gluing the hand into place so that it looks like it's gripping the top of the axe head. And when doing this, try to get the hand stuck on at a 90-degree angle to the axe itself, if that makes sense. Basically, we're aiming for something like this. It's not difficult, it just might take a few attempts to get it in the right position. But yeah, that'll need a few minutes to dry, so while it is drying, we can take the small dark rectangular piece, and a regular drinking straw, and then glue the paper piece around the straw. That's all I'm doing here. Then, if you have a really sharp pair of scissors, you can cut that to size straight away. Otherwise, it's best to leave it a few minutes. And we really don't need all that much of this. Maybe 1/8 of an inch or 3 to 4 millimeters. Anyway, if I bring the main assembly back in, we can start gluing these into place. So, I like to add a generous blob of hot glue to the back of the axe head itself, and then stick that onto the kind of elbow area of the dwarf, while at the same time making sure that the bottom of the axe handle is flush with the bottom of the whole piece. Something like this. Though I also like to add a spot of PVA under the end of the axe handle as well, just to make sure that's not going anywhere. Next, I'll put another blob of hot glue onto the other elbow area, stick the little straw piece on top of that, then add some more glue to the inside of the straw, and glue the shield on top, making sure that the edges with the shadows are facing towards the bottom. And that should result in this kind of thing. That's the dwarf pretty much done, though we are going to need to cover the top. So to do this, we'll glue the larger rectangular texture to some cereal box card, cut that to the same thickness as the top of the piece, and then glue that into place, like I'm doing on the screen right now. And there you have it. That's the top corrugation covered up. Next, we'll move on to the pieces that go on either side. Right then, so for these, we're going to make a couple of pillars. And these are exactly the same as those that featured in episode 92, so I'll just run through this part quickly. These two pieces need to be glued to thin cereal box card and cut exactly to size, and these two need to be glued to corrugated card or similar. However, when cutting out these last two, we'll need to cut off a little bit extra from these particular sides. Basically, if the card that you used to make the first two was 1mm thick, then you'll also need to cut off an extra 1mm from each of these sides, just so that the whole thing remains square when we glue it all together. Hopefully I explained that well enough. Anyway, we'll also need a top for these pillars, and those can be glued to some cereal box card as well. Then, as I say, these can be glued together just like those in episode 92. Though, I will leave the video running just for the sake of completeness. And there you go, that's one pillar done. Though, obviously, we're going to need to make two of those, one for each side, like so. Then, all we'll need to do is hot glue these to the sides of our main piece. So, once again, I'll speed things up slightly while I go ahead and do that. Okay, with that done, here's the finished piece. It's not overly three-dimensional, but I think it does a reasonable job of looking like a sculpted relief. Plus, it's also worth pointing out that I have included left and right versions of the hand and the axe, so that, you can make a second one as a mirror image if you want to, like if they're flanking a doorway or something like that. But yeah, that's all I've got for this one, so here's the usual picture of them in action, and while they are just bits of paper stuck to bits of card, I think they kinda look the part. So all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, as always, and I'd love to hear what you think of these down in the comments, and also if you'd like me to continue with this dwarven theme for a few more videos. But that's it for now, so thanks again, and I'll see you next time.